We built out the rough CDK code for our event bridge rule and our Lambda function. But we didn't actually write any Lambda code to send the email with SES. And you might be thinking, well, how do we do that? And more importantly, how do I use the same language that we're writing our infrastructure as code in, TypeScript, in our Lambda function? So let's start off by deleting our index.js, because that was just an empty example. And we're going to replace it with an index.ts. And then we can do the same thing again. Let's export a function called handler. And then we can put a little to-do in here. We can say add our SES logic. And then we can think, okay, well, now we've got this TS file. How do we bundle this up and transpile it and get it ready and all the rest of it to go in our Lambda? And actually, nothing has to change in our code here. So if we do an npm run deploy, then CDK will prepare our TypeScript Lambda function, or our TypeScript entry point. Whoops, sorry, I forgot to change that index.ts to an index.js. It'll prepare that file for use in Lambda. So it bundled it, it's getting building, and we can say, yeah, we're happy with that. And then it will create the CloudFormation change set to deploy it. One thing that's worth noting is that in a previous lesson, we added ESBuild into our dev dependencies, and so the TypeScript transpilation will happen with ESBuild. If you don't want that, you can just leave it out and get rid of the dependency, or you can configure it manually as an option. But then you will need Docker, and remember that for Docker Engine, it's now requiring a license for commercial use. That's controlled by the bundling options here. So if we pop to bundling, go to bundling options, you can see whether we want to minify, which we do probably by default. We definitely want source maps on to translate the built code back into the original. You can have the sources put with it if you would like, but you don't have to. And then we can specify whether we want to use ESBuild or whether we want to use the Docker alternative. And you can see that here with the force Docker bundling argument or property. So let's wait for that to deploy. Okay, so we've got through the new stuff. Everything that we've just been created has been added, and now it's just cleaning up some old infrastructure that was previously in our project. So let's pop over to AWS and get logged into the account. All right, so here we are, and we pop to the Lambda console, and we can see we've got our getting started stack with our brush your teeth function. And you can see that it's been wired up automatically to Event Bridge. We can click on that, and we can see the trigger here. And there is our lovely cron schedule to run this every day at 7 if we're in British summertime, or 6 in UTC. So that's a pretty simple example of how we can get that function going. But we still haven't written any code yet. So I'm going to install the AWS SDK SES client, because the Node.js 18 runtime includes version 3 of the AWS SDK by default, so we don't have to install it as a normal dependency. And then we would also like that to be available while working here, so I'm going to pop that over into dev dependencies as well, and just do another quick npm install just to make sure it's still happy. It is, lovely. And so we've got that, and then we can pop back to our bundling settings in the Node.js function, and let's add in a few bits and pieces into this. So I'm going to explicitly turn minifying on because I would like that. We would like source maps, and then for the source map mode, I prefer inline source maps because I find they work a little bit more reliably with third-party tools especially. And then we can say that we've got some external modules, and for this we're going to say that it's anything in the version 3 AWS SDK, which is in the at AWS-SDK namespace. All right, let's run another deployment and make sure that still works fine. Great, that's building away, so that is most likely happy. Don't think there's much to change in CloudFormation. So let's write the code. We can import the SES client. Lovely, and then let's initialize it outside the handler so that it can be used between multiple requests. Whoops. I can pass in an empty configuration object here, and it will pick up the region and credentials from the Lambda function itself. You have to specify those explicitly. And then in the handler, we can do SES client.send. We can do a new send email command. Let's look at what properties we're expected to provide for that. We need a source, a destination, and a message. So source is a string. Let's call that no reply at jshows.com. Tell you what, let's pop this in a subdomain to make it a little bit simpler. So it's called CDK Course jshows.com. For our destination, I'm going to put, what should we have this at? Let's have James at cdkcourse.jshows.com. I'll tell you what, let me lump it to my real email, why not? Lovely. And then finally, what else did it want? It wanted a body, I think, didn't it? Or a message, sorry. And the message is a class. In there is a body, and then body we can have text. And then what type is content? Is content just a string? Let's go and have a look. A data and a char set. So let's have a data object there, and the char set, which should be UTF-8. And then we do the same again. We can have a subject. That's another one. So let's have the data and then the char set again. And I think we've just about gotten that together. Oops, we would like that to be an object. And what properties are in destination? 2 addresses. There we go. So let's pop that in there, make it into an array. Lovely. Okay. Last thing we've got to set is make this an async function. And then we've got our call to send our reminder. So let's say the subject is going to be brush your teeth. And then the text can say, it's time to brush your teeth. And then again, we can do a quick deployment. And that's going to bundle up the Lambda function first. So I'm just going to scroll up here and we'll ignore the rest of the code for now. And you can see that it's bundling asset, getting started stack, brush your teeth function code stage. Great. And that's going into this file in the cdk.out. So you can see we're getting an index.js file with our bundled code in, even though we're writing here in an index.ts. And we can actually go and inspect that. We can go and see what it looks like. So assets 5f. Let's go and grab the final version of that asset. So I'm just going to pop into the template and we can find the brush your teeth function. And let's get the asset there so we can see that that's the S3 key, F96FF. Let's go and find that there. And there's our index.js. And here we are. Here is our bundled code with source map at the bottom. And I can just format this so we can have a better look at it. And you can see we've got the usual stuff from this being bundled up. And then we've got a require statement for the SES SDK. And then we've got our handler with the command in here. So that's all been minified nicely, and you can tell by the size of that bundle, because it's just a tiny little file, that we haven't got the AWS SDK packaged with it because it's in that external modules specification. So let's have a bit of a recap of what we've done. So we wanted a schedule, and so we used EventBridge for our schedule. And to do that, we used the abstraction of the class rule, which handled the EventBridge rule. That wanted the schedule here. And that is again an abstraction with various options for the types of schedules you can have. We used a cron one, and we used this object to form our cron string rather than having to specify it manually. Then we made our Lambda function. So we used Node.js function, which is a really nice high-level abstraction that does all sorts of things like bundling, minifying, and all the rest of it on top of just building out an actual Lambda function. That could have had the permissions specified in a property in our constructor here, but we decided actually to use a method on the instantiated version of it when it had been built. So we used add to role policy. We added in a policy statement, which is not a construct, although you'll start using new everywhere and expecting to have this syntax here of where you want to attach it to the ID and the properties. But just bear in mind, some things might catch you out and it might just be a normal class. And that again had in some very familiar fields from an IAM policy, and that'll be used to generate the policy. We used 2 methods for this, 2 private methods on our class, just to keep things a little bit cleaner from having a whopping great constructor. And then we used some really nice glue to tie it all together. And this add target here, it added a permission on the Lambda function, and it added in the event bridge rule target.